He warned them the boat would fail, so they fired him, not knowing he'd be the only one who could save them hours later. She tore his report in half in front of everyone, but days later she was trapped in rising water, calling the name she had just erased. They called him a problem, until the moment their lives depended on him. Marcus Reed didn't argue when he was fired. He didn't fight back. He just walked away, with the truth still in his hands. But out on open water, where power means nothing and mistakes cost lives, that truth came crashing back. Because the man they silenced was the only one who knew how to stop what was coming. And when everything fell apart, he still chose to go back, not for revenge, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. He was fired like he didn't matter, but days later, he became the only reason they survived. The morning sun hit the water hard enough to make everything look sharper than it really was. At Bayfront Marina, the polished decks of luxury yachts reflected light like glass, turning the whole place into something that felt less like a workplace and more like a showroom for people who had never worried about a bill in their life. White hulls, chrome railings, men in pressed shirts, women in sunglasses that cost more than a month's rent. Everything clean. Everything controlled. Marcus Reed stood at the edge of Dock 7 with a clipboard in his hand, the smell of salt and diesel clinging to his shirt. He had been there since before sunrise, same as always, walking the length of the Silver Crest twice already, checking what other people ignored. He knew boats the way some men knew faces. Not just how they looked, but how they felt. The subtle vibration underfoot when an engine wasn't sitting right. The faint scent of fuel where there shouldn't be any. The way metal carried stress long before it failed. And the Silver Crest wasn't right. It hadn't been right 3 days ago. It wasn't right yesterday. And it definitely wasn't right this morning. He'd written it all down. 3 times. Now he stood there holding the latest report, waiting for someone to listen. Victoria Hale didn't make people wait. You heard her before you saw her. Heels against wood, measured and precise. Then the quiet shift in the air as conversations lowered without anyone being told to lower them. She stepped onto the dock in a tailored white blazer that looked like it had never touched humidity, her blonde hair pulled back, her expression already set in place like she had somewhere more important to be, which she probably did. 34. CEO of Hale Maritime Group, the youngest in the company's history. People said she had rebuilt the company from debt into something sharp and profitable. They said she didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. Marcus believed that. He just didn't think that was always a good thing. Victor Lang, the operations director, moved beside her, talking low and fast, handing her a thin folder. She flipped it open without slowing down, scanning the contents in seconds. Marcus watched her eyes move, not reading, sorting, deciding. They stopped in front of him. "Mr. Reed," Victoria said, her voice even, controlled, like she had already finished the conversation in her head. Marcus nodded once. "Ma'am." He held out the report. "This is the 3rd submission," he said, steady. "The fuel intake coupling on the port engine is leaking under pressure. The bilge discharge valve isn't sealing, and the secondary steering is lagging, almost 2 seconds when you put load on it." Victor shifted slightly beside her, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, like he already knew how this would go. Victoria took the report from Marcus's hand. For a second, she just held it there, glancing down at the first page. The marina noise carried around them, lines creaking, distant engines idling, the soft slap of water against hulls. Then she looked up. "I've reviewed the certified inspection," she said. "This vessel has been cleared." Marcus didn't move. With respect, That inspection missed it. Victor let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Marcus, it's not theoretical, Marcus cut in, still calm, still respectful. If that coupling fails near a hot engine compartment, you're looking at ignition risk. And if the valve gives out at the same time, you're taking on water faster than you can clear it. Victoria's eyes didn't change. Not anger, not curiosity, just a quiet closing. A man in your position, she said, doesn't override a certified report on the morning of a closing. Marcus felt the words land, but his voice stayed level. I'm not trying to override anything. I'm trying to keep people safe. For a moment, no one spoke. The investors gathered at the top of the dock ramp watched without pretending not to. Staff slowed down just enough to listen without looking like they were listening. Victoria looked at the paper in her hand again. Then, without raising her voice, without changing her expression, she tore it clean in half. The sound was louder than it should have been. Paper ripping in two neat pieces, the edges sharp, final. She let the halves fall slightly apart in her hands before handing one back to him. You're done here, she said. No heat, no anger, just decision. Marcus took the torn page without looking at it. Around them, the marina seemed to pause, then continue like nothing had happened. Security will escort you off the property, Victor added, already turning away. Marcus didn't move. He looked at Victoria just for a second longer. You can fire me, he said quietly. That's your right. She didn't respond. But don't take that boat out today. Something flickered behind her eyes, so small most people wouldn't have caught it. Annoyance. Maybe. Or the briefest recognition that he believed what he was saying. It was gone just as fast. She turned her back on him. Prepare the vessel, she said to Victor, already walking toward the waiting investors. We're not delaying this again. And just like that, Marcus Reed stopped existing in her world. A security guard approached, not unkind, just doing his job. Marcus handed over his access badge without argument, without protest. He folded the torn piece of paper once, then again, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. As he walked down the dock, past polished boats and people who had already moved on, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew what was going to happen. The sun climbed higher, bright and indifferent, turning the water into a sheet of glare. Behind him, lines were cast off. Engines came to life, and the silver crest, perfect, expensive, and quietly broken, began to move. Out past the harbor, toward open water, toward something no one on that dock was prepared for. Except the man they had just fired. Marcus Reed drove home with the windows down, even though the heat sat heavy over Miami like a blanket that wouldn't lift. The air smelled like asphalt and ocean salt, mixing into something that clung to the back of your throat. Traffic crawled along Biscayne Boulevard, horns tapping in frustration, engines idling in uneven rhythm. He barely noticed any of it. His right hand rested on the steering wheel. His left kept brushing against his jacket pocket, feeling the folded edge of the torn report still tucked inside like something unfinished. He had said what he needed to say. That didn't mean it would matter. By the time he pulled into the lot outside his apartment building, the sun had shifted just enough to cast long shadows between the cracked concrete lines. The building itself leaned slightly, like it had been holding its breath for too many years. Paint peeling, rust creeping along the railings, the kind of place people passed without seeing. Marcus shut off the engine and sat there for a moment. Silence. Not real silence. There was never real silence in that part of the city. Somewhere a TV played too loud. A car door slammed. Someone laughed from a balcony above. Life kept moving, no matter what you lost that day. He stepped out, grabbed nothing but his keys, and walked up the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator that only worked when it felt like it. Each step creaked under his weight. By the time he reached the third floor, he could already hear her. Aaliyah's voice, soft but focused, reading out loud to herself from inside the apartment. She always did that when she was working through something difficult, turned the words into something she could hear, something she could understand. Marcus paused outside the door for half a second, listening. Then he unlocked it. The apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something sweet, maybe the cheap vanilla candle Aaliyah liked to light when she was home alone. The fan in the corner turned slow circles, pushing warm air from one side of the room to the other without really cooling anything down. She sat at the small kitchen table, her notebook open, pencil in hand, her hair pulled back into a loose braid that had already started to come undone. She looked up the second he stepped inside. Kids always knew. "How come you're home early?" she asked. No suspicion, no fear, just curiosity. Marcus set his keys down on the counter, the soft clink louder than it should have been. He took a breath. "I don't work at the marina anymore," he said. He kept his voice even, calm, like it was just another fact. Aaliyah watched him for a second longer than most adults would have. Then she asked the question that mattered. "Did you do something wrong?" Marcus shook his head once, no. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, resting his forearms on the table. "I did everything right." She studied his face the way he always studied things before deciding what they meant. "Then why'd they fire you?" she asked. Marcus looked down at the table, at the faint scratch marks in the wood from years of use, at the small ink stain near the corner where she had once pressed too hard with a pen. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "doing the right thing costs you something." Aaliyah didn't answer right away. She looked back down at her notebook, then up again. "Was it because you told them something they didn't want to hear?" The question landed heavier than anything else that day. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not pain exactly, but something close to it. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it was." She nodded once like she had expected that answer. Then she turned her notebook around and pushed it toward him. "Can you help me with this?" she asked. No drama, no pity, just life moving forward. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yeah," he said, softer now. "Let me see." They sat there together, side by side, working through long division under the hum of the ceiling fan. Outside, a bus passed, its brakes hissing, the sound echoing up through the open window. For a while, everything felt steady, grounded, like the world had narrowed down to something manageable. But Marcus's mind didn't stay there, not completely, because underneath it all, something kept pulling at him. A memory, the smell, that sharp metallic trace of fuel in the lower compartment that morning, stronger than it should have been, fresh, active. He saw it again in his head, the thin sheen along the coupling, the way the light caught it just right, the way it didn't belong there. 3 reports, 3 warnings, all ignored. "Dad?" Aaliyah's voice pulled him back. "You're not looking," she said, pointing at the paper. Marcus blinked, refocusing. "Sorry," he said. "Show me where you got stuck." She pointed, and he walked her through it step by step, steady and patient, like he always did. But the thought didn't leave him. It just sat there, quiet and persistent, waiting. After dinner, simple boxed macaroni and a couple of cut-up apples, they sat on the couch together. The TV played low in the background, some game show neither of them was really watching. Aaliyah leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You think they'll call you back?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He watched the flicker of the screen, the artificial brightness of it, the way it filled the room without meaning anything. "No," he said finally. "People like that, they don't usually change their minds." Aaliyah shifted slightly. "That's okay," she said. "You'll find something else." Marcus smiled, just a little. "Yeah," he said. "I will." But even as he said it, his eyes drifted toward the window, toward the direction of the water. Out there, somewhere beyond the skyline, the Silver Crest would already be moving. Engines running, systems under load, small problems turning into bigger ones. He could almost hear it. That subtle vibration just beneath the surface, the kind most people missed, the kind that didn't stay small for long. Aaliyah tilted her head back to look at him. "You're thinking about the boat, aren't you?" Marcus didn't try to deny it. "Yeah," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Is it really that bad?" Marcus looked at her, at the seriousness in her eyes, the way she wanted the truth even if it wasn't easy. "It could be," he said. He didn't dress it up. He didn't soften it. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Then why didn't they listen?" she asked. Marcus let out a quiet breath. "Because they thought they knew better." Aaliyah looked down at her hands, then back up again. "That doesn't make sense," she said. Marcus almost laughed. "No," he said. "It doesn't." The room fell quiet again. Outside, the sky had shifted from gold to a deeper blue, the first hints of evening settling in. Marcus reached for the remote and turned the volume down even further. For a moment, everything held still. But somewhere out past the harbor, far beyond what either of them could see, something was beginning to go wrong. And this time, there was no one left on board who knew how to stop it. 3 days earlier, before the sun had even cleared the horizon, Marcus Reed had been alone in the engine compartment of the Silver Crest. The air down there always felt different, thicker, warmer, filled with the low hum of machinery even when everything was technically off. It was a place most people avoided unless they had to be there. Too tight, too loud, too real. Marcus preferred it. Because down there, things told the truth. He crouched beside the port engine, flashlight angled just right, watching how the beam caught along the metal fittings. Clean lines, polished surfaces, expensive equipment. And then something off. It wasn't dramatic. Not a spray, not a visible leak pouring out. Just a thin, almost invisible sheen along the fuel intake coupling. Marcus leaned closer, the light steady in his hand. There. A faint line, a hairline stress fracture running along the edge of the fitting. Easy to miss. Easy to ignore. He reached out and ran a gloved finger just beneath it, then pulled his hand back and held it under the light. A faint gloss. Fuel fresh. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. That wasn't supposed to be there. He sat back on his heels, already mapping it out in his head. Under pressure, that fracture would widen. Heat from the engine would build. Fuel vapor would accumulate. And if it hit the wrong spark, he didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Marcus stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and moved deeper into the compartment. Next stop, the bilge discharge valve. He knelt again, unscrewing the inspection cap, listening as he worked. Not just with his ears, but with that instinct he'd built over years, the one that told him when something wasn't right, even before he could explain why. The seal gave just a little too easily. He frowned. That shouldn't have happened. He tested it again, slower this time. Same result. The valve wasn't holding the way it should, which meant if water got in, it wouldn't leave fast enough. Marcus exhaled slowly. 2 problems, he said quietly. Then he paused. No, 3. He climbed up into the narrow access path that led toward the secondary steering linkage. The metal was still cool from the night air, the space just wide enough for him to move through without scraping his shoulders. He braced himself, grabbed the test handle, and applied pressure. The response lagged. Not much, but enough. He did it again. Same delay. A fraction of a second, most people wouldn't even notice. But out on open water, under load, in the wrong moment, that fraction turned into something else, something dangerous. Marcus sat there for a second, breathing in the mix of oil and metal and salt. 3 issues. Individually, manageable. Together? A risk. The kind you didn't gamble on. Not with people on board. He climbed back up onto the deck, blinking as the morning light hit his eyes. The marina was just waking up. Workers moving in the distance, a few early arrivals, the low murmur of engines warming. Marcus didn't waste time. He went straight to the maintenance office, pulled a blank report form, and started writing. Clear, direct, no drama. Fuel intake coupling, visible stress fracture and active seepage under inspection. Bilge discharge valve, seal failure, inconsistent pressure retention. Secondary steering, lag under load, estimated delay 1.5 to 2 seconds. He signed it, dated it, and handed it in. That was report 1. By midday, it came back. He unfolded the paper, scanning the notes. Reviewed, within acceptable parameters. Marcus stared at the words. Acceptable, he repeated under his breath. He looked back down at his own handwriting, at the details he had laid out, then at the neat printed dismissal stamped across it. He didn't argue. Not yet. He went back to the boat. Checked again. The fracture hadn't gotten better. The valve hadn't fixed itself. The steering hadn't corrected. So he wrote it again. This time more detailed, more specific. He included diagrams, measurements, exact observations. He walked it into the office himself. That's when he met Victor Lang. Victor didn't look up right away when Marcus stepped into his office. He was finishing a call, his voice smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't rush because it didn't need to. Yes, absolutely, Victor was saying. Everything is on schedule. You'll have a flawless demonstration. He hung up, then leaned back in his chair, finally acknowledging Marcus. Something I can help you with? Marcus set the report on his desk. Yes, he said. This. Victor glanced at it, then picked it up between 2 fingers like it was something he'd already decided not to care about. I've seen your earlier submission, Victor said. This is the same concern? It's not a concern, Marcus replied. It's a problem. Victor smiled slightly. Marcus, he said almost patiently, we have a certified inspection on file. Signed. Approved. That vessel is cleared. It shouldn't be. Victor tapped the edge of the report against his desk. You understand what's happening this week, right? He asked. That sale goes through. We're talking about millions. Investors, contracts, timelines. Marcus didn't blink. I understand what happens if that coupling fails under heat, he said. I understand what happens if water gets in and that valve doesn't hold, and I understand what happens when steering lags at the wrong moment. Victor's smile didn't change. But what you don't understand, he said, is how decisions get made at this level. He slid the report back across the desk. These are maintenance observations, he continued, not grounds to delay a major transaction. Marcus looked down at the paper, then back up. So we're just going to pretend it's fine? He asked. Victor shrugged lightly. We're going to rely on certified inspection, he said. That's how this works. Marcus stood there for a moment longer. Then he picked up the report, Kay, he said quietly. Victor nodded, already reaching for something else. Conversation over. But Marcus didn't leave the marina. He went back to the boat, checked again. And when nothing had changed, he wrote it a third time. This time he kept a copy, folded it carefully, slipped it into his jacket. Because somewhere deep down, he had a feeling the truth wasn't going to stay buried. Not for long. But truth had a way of taking its time. Marcus Reed had learned that long before the Silver Crest ever docked at Bayfront Marina. Long before reports and signatures and executives who made decisions from offices that never smelled like oil or salt water. He had learned it growing up in a part of the city where things broke and stayed broken. Where people didn't get second chances unless they built them themselves. The apartment he grew up in wasn't much different from the one he lived in now, just smaller, louder, and filled with more people trying to make something out of nothing. His mother worked double shifts cleaning office buildings downtown. His father wasn't around long enough to leave much behind, except a name Marcus rarely used. He learned early that if something stopped working, you fixed it. If someone needed help, you showed up. No one gave you anything, but you could still choose who you were. That part stayed with him, even now, even after everything that had happened that morning. The next day came slow. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains in Marcus's apartment, soft at first, then stronger, filling the room with a pale glow that made everything look a little more hopeful than it felt. Marcus was already awake. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at nothing in particular. The TV was off. The fan hummed quietly in the corner. Aaliyah came out of her room in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair tied back neater than it had been the night before. You didn't sleep, she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus gave a small smile. Got some. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push it. You still thinking about the boat? She asked. Marcus hesitated. Yeah, he admitted. Aaliyah walked over and set her bag down, climbing into the chair across from him. You think something's going to happen? She asked quietly. Marcus looked at her. He had always told her the truth, even when it wasn't easy. I think it could, he said. She nodded slowly, absorbing that in a way that didn't feel like a child's reaction. Then why doesn't someone stop it? She asked. Marcus let out a breath. Because the people who can stop it don't believe it's a problem, he said. Aaliyah frowned slightly. That doesn't make it not a problem, she said. Marcus almost laughed. No, he said, it doesn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Aaliyah reached across the table and placed her small hand over his. You did what you were supposed to do, she said. It wasn't reassurance. It was a statement. Marcus looked down at her hand, then back at her. Yeah, he said softly. I did. She squeezed his hand once, then stood, grabbing her bag. You're still taking me to school, right? She asked. Always, Marcus said. The drive to school felt like any other morning. Traffic, stoplights, people rushing past without looking at each other. The city moving in its usual rhythm, untouched by the small decisions that could change everything. Marcus pulled up to the curb, watching as Aaliyah unbuckled her seatbelt. She paused before getting out. Yeah? If something happens, it's not your fault, she said. Marcus looked at her, really looked this time. You don't know that, he said. She gave a small shrug. I know you, she replied. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the flow of kids heading toward the school entrance, her figure disappearing into the crowd without looking back. Marcus stayed there a moment longer than he needed to. Then he pulled away. He didn't have anywhere specific to be. Not anymore. So he drove. Through streets he knew, past places he had worked before, past corners where people stood waiting for something, jobs, rides, chances. Eventually, he ended up near a small community center tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down grocery store. The place wasn't much to look at, but the doors were always open. Marcus parked and stepped inside. The smell of coffee and toast greeted him first, then voices, low, familiar, steady. People sitting at folding tables, talking quietly, sharing what little they had. Ms. Clara stood behind the counter, pouring coffee into chipped mugs like she had done every morning for as long as Marcus could remember. She looked up when he walked in. Well, if it isn't the hardest working man at that marina, she said. Marcus gave a small smile. Not anymore. Her expression softened. What happened? She asked. Marcus shrugged lightly. Told the truth, he said. Wrong place. Ms. Clara nodded like she understood more than she needed to ask. That'll do it, she said. She handed him a cup of coffee without charging him, like she always did. Marcus didn't argue. He took it, then moved toward a table where an older man sat struggling with a broken radio. Still giving you trouble? Marcus asked. The man looked up, relieved. Thing just won't hold a signal, he said. Marcus set his coffee down and picked up the radio, turning it over in his hands. Let's see, he said. He worked quietly, adjusting wires, tightening connections, his movements steady and practiced. For a few minutes, the world narrowed again. Simple. Fixable. When the radio crackled back to life, the man's face lit up. There you go, Marcus said, handing it back. You should charge for that, the man said. Marcus shook his head. Just glad it's working, he replied. That was who he was. Even now. Even after being humiliated, dismissed, pushed out like he didn't matter. He still showed up, still helped, still chose the same path. Because that wasn't about them. That was about him. Across the room, Miss Clara watched him for a moment, then shook her head slightly, smiling to herself. World's got a funny way of testing the right people, she murmured. Marcus didn't hear her. He was already moving on to the next thing, but somewhere out beyond the shoreline, where the city's noise faded into open water, the test he couldn't see was already beginning to take shape. And this time, it was going to come back for him. Out on the water, the Silver Crest moved like it had something to prove. The Miami skyline faded behind it, glass towers shrinking into the distance as the yacht cut through open bay, its polished hull slicing clean lines through the water. From a distance, it looked perfect, expensive, untouchable. On the main deck, Laughter drifted easily into the wind. Champagne glasses clinked. A server moved between guests with practiced grace. The investors, men in tailored suits, women in light summer dresses, leaned against the railings, admiring the view, nodding as Victoria Hale spoke with calm authority about expansion plans and projected returns. Everything was going exactly the way it was supposed to. At least on the surface. Victoria stood near the center of the deck, one hand resting lightly on the polished wood railing, the other holding a glass she hadn't really touched. Her voice carried just enough to hold attention without needing to rise. "This vessel represents more than a single asset," she was saying. "It's a demonstration of operational precision. What we're building here isn't just scale, it's consistency." The investors nodded. That was what they wanted to hear. Control, certainty, clean numbers that didn't leave room for doubt. Victoria gave them exactly that. She always did. Behind her, Captain Lewis Grant stood near the helm, his eyes moving between the horizon and the instrument panel. He was a man who had spent most of his life on the water, the kind who didn't get rattled easily. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't obvious. Not yet. Just a shift. A vibration underfoot that didn't match the engine's normal rhythm. Subtle, irregular. Easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. He adjusted his stance slightly, feeling it again through the soles of his shoes. "Probably nothing," he muttered to himself. New boats had quirks. Old ones had personalities. You learned the difference over time. Still, his eyes flicked down to the gauges. Everything read normal. Oil pressure, temperature, RPM, all where they should be. He exhaled, letting it go. For now. Below deck, the air was warmer. The engine compartment pulsed with heat, the machinery working harder now that the yacht had picked up speed. The low hum had deepened into something heavier, something that filled the space like a constant, steady pressure. And beneath it, a smell. At first it was faint, barely noticeable, a trace of something sharp, something chemical. One of the junior deckhands paused halfway down the stairs, nose wrinkling slightly. "You smell that?" he asked. Another crew member glanced up from securing a panel. "Smell what?" The first man hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing," he said. He didn't want to be the one who made something out of nothing. Not today. Not with investors on board. Up on deck, Victoria continued speaking, her tone smooth, controlled, untouched by the small things happening beneath her feet. Because to her, they were small. Details. And details were handled by people below her. That was how the system worked. Victor Lang's voice echoed in her memory from earlier that morning. Calm, confident, dismissive in a way that felt reassuring. Everything has been reviewed. Everything is within acceptable parameters. She believed that, because she had built a career on trusting the structure she controlled, because second-guessing meant hesitation, and hesitation cost money. The yacht pushed further out, leaving the shelter of the harbor. The water grew less predictable. Small waves turned into rolling swells, the hull responding with a deeper, heavier movement. That was when the second sign came. The smell didn't fade. It grew. Not overwhelming, but persistent. The kind that stayed with you once you noticed it. Captain Grant caught it this time. He turned slightly, scanning the deck, then glanced toward the access hatch that led below. "Check the engine compartment," he said quietly to one of the crew. The man nodded and disappeared down the stairs. For a moment, everything held. The sky stretched wide and clear overhead. The wind carried the sound of distant seagulls. The investors continued their conversations, unaware of the shift happening just beneath their feet. Victoria lifted her glass slightly, acknowledging a question from one of the men beside her. "We're positioned to close this deal by the end of the quarter," she said. "Today is just a formality." The words came easily. They always did. Then a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, but wrong. A sharp, uneven knock from somewhere deep within the hull. Captain Grant's head snapped slightly toward the sound. His expression didn't change, but his body did. Subtle tension, a shift in posture. He stepped toward the helm, eyes narrowing at the instruments again. Still normal. But now, he felt it. That vibration again. Stronger, less subtle. The crew member who had gone below reappeared at the top of the stairs, his face tighter than before. "Captain," before he could finish, the engine stuttered. Just for a second. A brief drop in rhythm. Then it caught again. Hard. The entire vessel shuddered, a deep concussive tremor that rippled from the lower deck up through the structure like something waking up angry beneath the surface. Glasses rattled. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Victoria's hand tightened slightly on the railing. "What was that?" one of the investors asked. Captain Grant didn't answer right away. He was already moving. "Reduce speed," he called out. "Now." But the system didn't respond the way it should have. The throttle lagged, a fraction of a second too long, then another. And in that delay, something shifted. Something real, something Marcus Reed had seen days ago. But no one here had chosen to believe. Victoria turned slightly, her eyes moving toward the helm for the first time with something that wasn't complete control. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. A crack in certainty. "Captain," she called. He didn't look at her. "Stay where you are," he said, his voice steady but sharper now. Below deck, the smell had turned unmistakable. Fuel, fresh, active, and building. The Silver Crest kept moving forward, but not the way it was supposed to. Not anymore. The Silver Crest didn't stop. Not right away. For a few long seconds, it kept moving forward, cutting through the water like nothing had changed. The skyline was still behind them. The sun still hung bright over the bay. The investors still stood frozen in place, waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. But beneath their feet, the illusion was cracking. Captain Grant gripped the controls, his jaw tightening as he tried to bring the engine down smoothly. The throttle responded late again, just a fraction, just enough to feel wrong in his hands. "Something's off," he muttered. That was all he needed to say. The crew moved faster now, no longer pretending this was routine. One of them rushed back down the stairs toward the engine compartment. Another reached for the radio, hesitating for half a second before flipping it on. Victoria stood still in the middle of the deck, her glass forgotten in her hand. Her eyes moved across the scene, crew members shifting, the captain's posture changing, the subtle tension spreading like a ripple no one could quite contain. She had built her entire career on reading rooms, and this one had just changed. "What's happening?" one of the investors asked, his voice sharper now. Victoria didn't answer immediately, because for the first time that day, she didn't know. Below deck, the heat had intensified. The crew member who had gone down earlier stopped halfway into the compartment, the smell hitting him harder now, thick, unmistakable, no longer something you could ignore or question. Fuel. He stepped forward carefully, flashlight in hand. The beam caught the coupling, and this time there was no mistaking it. A slow, visible seep, thin at first, then gathering into something heavier, glistening under the light as it tracked along the metal surface. "Captain," he shouted upward, "we've got a leak." He didn't finish. The engine sputtered again. Louder this time. A harsh, uneven choke that rattled through the compartment and up into the structure of the boat like something tearing loose inside it. Then, a sharp, concussive blast, not massive, not enough to destroy the vessel in one moment, but enough. Enough to knock the breath out of everyone on board. Enough to throw the entire system off balance. The lights flickered once, then went out. Darkness swallowed the lower deck in an instant. Above, the deck lurched hard to the right. Glasses shattered against the railing. Someone shouted. Another voice cried out in confusion as the sudden shift sent people stumbling. Victoria's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her hand reached for the nearest support, but the motion came too late. The deck tilted again. Her footing slipped. She felt herself fall, hard, against the side of the companionway as she lost balance completely. The impact knocked the air from her chest, sharp and sudden. Before she could recover, the door behind her slammed shut. The metal frame twisted just enough under the force of the shift. And then it stuck. Victoria pushed herself up, breath catching, her hand reaching for the handle. She pulled. Nothing. She pulled again, harder this time. The door didn't move. For a second, she just stood there, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Then she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard before. Water. Not the soft movement against the hull, not the distant rhythm of the sea. This was different. Closer. Faster. It came from the other side of the door. She stepped back instinctively, then looked down. A thin line of water was already pushing under the frame, spreading across the floor, catching what little light filtered through from above. Cold, relentless, real. Above deck, Captain Grant had already switched to emergency protocol. "Everyone stay where you are," he called out. "Crew, with me, now." But even as he spoke, the secondary systems lagged again. The steering responded too slow. The vessel drifted off heading, the bow turning farther than it should have before correcting. He fought the wheel, bringing it back. But the delay was there, exactly where it shouldn't have been, exactly where Marcus Reed had said it would be. The realization hit him hard. Not gradual, not uncertain. Clear. "We should never have taken this boat out," he muttered. On the far side of the deck, one of the investors grabbed the railing, his face pale now. "What's happening?" he demanded. This time, no one tried to soften the answer. "We've got a mechanical failure," Grant said. "Stay calm." But calm was already slipping away. The smell had reached the upper deck now. Faint, but unmistakable. Fuel. And something else. Something hotter. Something dangerous. Below, Victoria pressed her hand against the door again, her breathing uneven now as she pulled with everything she had. It didn't budge. The water climbed higher. An inch. Then another. She looked around the narrow space, her eyes adjusting slowly to the dimness. No other exit. No secondary hatch. Nothing. For the first time in years, Victoria Hale felt something she couldn't control. Not a problem she could solve with a decision. Not a situation she could outmaneuver. Something else. Something simpler and far more dangerous. Fear. Above her, the yacht shuddered again. Another deep, violent tremor that rippled through the structure, louder than before. Closer. And this time, no one on board could pretend it was still under control. Because it wasn't. Not anymore. At Bayfront Marina, the world still looked normal. From a distance, the docks stretched out under the late afternoon sun, calm and orderly. Boats rocked gently in their slips. A few tourists wandered along the edge of the boardwalk, taking pictures, unaware of anything beyond what they could see. Inside the operations office, the air conditioning hummed steadily, cool and controlled, so different from the chaos unfolding miles out on the water. Mara Collins sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. She had been watching the Silver Crest's position since it left the harbor. Not because anyone told her to, but because something hadn't felt right that morning. She had seen Marcus standing there, had seen the way he held that report, the way he didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, just said what needed to be said and accepted the outcome. People like that didn't make things up. Her screen flickered slightly. A small icon in the corner shifted from green to amber. At first, it didn't look like much. A minor alert, the kind that popped up now and then when systems adjusted under load. But Mara didn't look away. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she pulled up the detailed feed. The vessel's movement had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The smooth, straight track it had been following out of the harbor had turned uneven, slight corrections, overcompensations, movements that didn't match the calm water conditions. Her stomach tightened. She reached for the phone. Victor Lang answered on the second ring. "Yes?" "It's Mara," she said quickly. "I'm seeing irregular movement on the Silver Crest, and there's an alert on the system. Engine fluctuation, maybe more." There was a pause on the other end. Then Victor exhaled lightly, like she had just interrupted something trivial. "It's nothing," he said. "Probably a sensor misread." "It doesn't look like a misread," Mara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The track, I said it's nothing," Victor cut in, sharper now. "The captain has it under control." Mara hesitated. Her eyes stayed on the screen. The amber light didn't turn back to green. "Should we notify?" she began. "No." The word came fast, firm. "Do not escalate this," Victor said. "Do not contact the Coast Guard. Do not create a situation where there isn't one." Mara swallowed. "There are investors on that boat," he continued. "We have a closing happening. If you start making calls and this turns out to be nothing, you'll be the one responsible for blowing up a multi-million-dollar deal." The words hung in the air. Not loud, but heavy. "Understood?" Victor asked. Mara didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved between the screen and the memory of Marcus that morning. Standing there. Calm. Certain. "I understand," she said quietly. Victor hung up. The line went dead. Mara set the phone down slowly. For a few seconds, she didn't move. The office around her continued as if nothing had changed. Phones rang. Someone laughed in the break room. A printer whirred in the background. Normal. Completely normal. Except it wasn't. Her screen flickered again. Another alert. Still amber. Still unresolved. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her mind racing through everything she knew. The reports. She had seen them. All three of them. Before Victor's office got to them. She had noticed the changes, the softened language, the missing details, the urgency stripped out and replaced with something safer. She hadn't said anything. Because it wasn't her place. Because she needed this job. Because people like Victor didn't get questioned without consequences. But now there was a boat out there. And something was wrong. Mara opened a secondary window on her monitor, pulled up the internal logs. Her fingers moved quickly, almost without thinking, navigating through the system, pulling up archived versions of the maintenance reports. There they were, the originals. Marcus's words, his details, his warnings. Clear, precise, ignored. Her heart started beating faster. She minimized the window, looked around. No one was paying attention to her. No one knew what she was seeing. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, then moved. She copied the files, saved them, sent them to her personal email. Time-stamped. Proof. She didn't know exactly why she was doing it yet. Just that she needed to. The alert on her screen pulsed again. This time, it didn't stay amber. It flickered, just for a second, toward red. Mara's breath caught. That wasn't minor anymore. That was escalation. She grabbed her phone again. Not the desk phone this time. Her personal one. She scrolled through her recent calls, stopped on a number she had only saved that morning. Marcus Reed. She stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the screen. If she made this call, there was no taking it back. Victor had been clear. Do nothing. But doing nothing didn't feel like an option anymore. Her mind flashed again to Marcus standing on that dock. You can fire me, he had said, but don't take that boat out today. Mara pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, each second stretching longer than it should have. Then it clicked. A voice came through. Hello, Marcus, calm, unaware. Mara swallowed, her voice tightening just slightly. It's Mara, she said, from the marina. There was a brief pause. Then, what's going on? Marcus asked. He didn't waste time. Didn't ask why she was calling. He already knew. Mara looked back at the screen. At the flashing alert. At the data that didn't lie. The silver crest, she said. Something's wrong. Silence on the line. Not confusion, not hesitation. Just silence. The kind that meant he was already putting the pieces together. The system flagged engine fluctuation, she continued, and the vessel's movement. It's off. I tried to report it, but they told me not to escalate. Another pause. Shorter this time. Where is it? Marcus asked. Mara pulled up the coordinates. About 3 miles southeast of the harbor, she said. Outer Bay. She hesitated, then added, quieter now. They didn't call anyone. On the other end of the line, Marcus didn't respond right away. But something shifted. She could feel it, the weight of the decision settling in. Because now it wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was real. And someone had to decide what to do next. Marcus stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the space between breaths. He didn't ask Mara to repeat herself. He didn't question the details, because he didn't need to. Everything she said lined up too cleanly with what he already knew. The leak, the valve, the delay in steering. He could see it unfolding in his mind like a chain reaction that had already been set in motion hours ago. Is anyone hurt? He asked. I don't know, Mara said. I can't reach the captain anymore. The signal's still active, but it's not steady. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. 3 miles out. That wasn't far. Not really. But out there, distance didn't work the same way. Time didn't either. Okay, he said. That was all. Just one word. But Mara heard the shift in it. What are you going to do? She asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. Because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't about fixing something anymore. It wasn't about proving he had been right. It was something else now. He looked across the room. Aaliyah sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, watching him. She had turned the TV down at some point without him noticing. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, searching for something she didn't have a name for yet. Marcus swallowed. I'll call you back, he said. Then he ended the call. The room felt smaller somehow. Quieter. Like everything had drawn inward to a single point. Aaliyah stood slowly. What happened? She asked. Marcus set the phone down on the counter, his hand lingering there for just a second. The boat, he said. Something went wrong. She nodded, like she had expected that answer. Is it bad? She asked. Marcus met her eyes. Yeah, he said. It could be. Aaliyah didn't look away. For a moment, she just stood there, thinking. Then she asked the question that mattered. Are you going to help them? The words hung in the air. Simple. Clear. Heavy. Marcus let out a breath, slow and steady. He turned slightly, looking out the window. From here, you couldn't see the water. Just rooftops. Power lines. The edge of the city stretching out towards something bigger. But he knew where it was. He knew what was happening out there. And he knew exactly who was on that boat. Victoria Hale. The woman who had stood in front of him that morning looked him in the eye and decided he didn't matter. The woman who had taken his work, his warning, and torn it in half like it was nothing. The memory came back sharp. The sound of paper ripping. The way everyone had watched. The way she hadn't hesitated. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. He had every reason to walk away. Every reason to let it unfold. To let the people who ignored him deal with the consequences of their own decisions. That would have been easy. That would have been understandable. He could stay here. Sit down. Wait for the news. Tell himself there was nothing he could have done. But that wasn't who he was. It never had been. He turned back to Aaliyah. She was still watching him. Waiting. Not judging. Not pushing. Just waiting. Marcus stepped forward and crouched slightly so he was at her level. No, he said quietly. They don't deserve it. Aaliyah's expression didn't change. She just listened. Marcus continued. But that's not why you help someone. He reached out and gently adjusted a loose strand of hair near her face. You help because it's the right thing, he said. Aaliyah nodded once, like she understood, because she did. Okay, she said. That was all. No more questions. Marcus stood up. Everything after that moved fast. He grabbed his jacket from the chair, his keys from the counter. His mind shifted into something focused, something clear. Not emotional, not reactive. Just steady. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Aaliyah, he said. She looked up. I need you to go next door, he told her. Mrs. Jenkins is home. Stay with her until I get back. Aaliyah nodded again, "You're going to the water," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus gave a small, tight smile. "Yeah," he said. She walked over to him and wrapped her arms around his waist without hesitation. Marcus held her for a second longer than usual. Then he stepped back. "Lock the door behind me," he said. "I will." He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air felt different out there. Heavier. Like the city itself was holding something in. Marcus didn't slow down. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his footsteps echoing against the concrete as he moved. Outside, the late afternoon sun had started to dip lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He got into his truck and started the engine in one motion. No hesitation. No second thoughts. The tires rolled over cracked pavement as he pulled out fast, heading toward the edge of the Marina District. Not the main entrance, not where security would recognize him. Somewhere quieter, somewhere he could still get out. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. Mara again. He glanced at it, then back at the road. He didn't answer. Not yet. Because now, the decision had already been made, and there was no turning back from it. Out beyond the shoreline, the silver crest was still drifting, still taking on water, still holding people who had no idea how close they were to something they couldn't fix. And the only man who understood exactly what was happening was already on his way. Marcus pushed the truck harder than he normally would, weaving through late afternoon traffic with a focus that shut everything else out. The city blurred past him. Storefronts, stoplights, people stepping off curbs. None of it slowing him down. None of it pulling his attention away from the one thing that mattered. 3 miles out. Fuel leak under heat. Failing bilge. Delayed steering. He didn't need to see it to know how bad it had gotten. By the time he reached the south edge of the Marina District, the sky had begun to shift toward evening, the light turning softer, but the air still heavy with heat. He didn't head toward the main entrance. Security would have stopped him before he got 10 feet past the gate. Instead, he turned down a narrow access road that most people didn't even notice. At the end of it sat a smaller working dock, older and rougher than the polished marina up north. The wood was worn, the paint chipped, ropes coiled loosely along the edge. This was where the fishing boats stayed. The real boats. The ones that didn't care how they looked. A man stood near the end of the dock, arms crossed, watching the water. Otis Carter. 60 years old, built like he had never slowed down, even when the years said he should have. He had known Marcus for over a decade, back when they both worked freight before Marcus moved into maintenance. Otis turned as Marcus pulled up. He didn't ask questions right away. Didn't need to. Something in Marcus's face told him enough. "What's going on?" Otis asked. Marcus stepped out of the truck, already moving. "Boat's in trouble," he said. 3 miles out. I need something that runs." Otis looked at him for half a second longer, then nodded once. "Take mine," he said, tossing a set of keys without hesitation. No paperwork, no permission, just trust. Marcus caught them clean. "Full tank?" he asked. 3/4, Otis replied. "Engine's solid. She'll get you there." Marcus didn't waste another second. He jogged down the dock, stepping onto the small center console boat tied off at the end. It wasn't pretty. The paint was faded, the edges worn from years of use. But it was reliable. That was what mattered. He untied the line, pushed off, and dropped into the driver's seat in one smooth motion. The engine turned over with a rough growl, then settled into a steady hum. Marcus adjusted the throttle. Then he was moving. The boat cut through the water, picking up speed as it cleared the dock, The shoreline pulled away behind him, the sounds of the city fading into the distance. Ahead, nothing but open water. The wind hit harder out there, carrying the smell of salt and something else, something sharper. Marcus narrowed his eyes, scanning the horizon. At first, he didn't see anything, just the long stretch of water rolling under the late-day light. Then a shape, small, low, not moving the way it should, and above it, a faint smear of dark smoke rising into the sky. Marcus's grip tightened on the wheel. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. It was worse than he thought. He pushed the throttle further. The engine responded, the boat surging forward as the waves grew stronger beneath him. Each rise and fall hit harder now, the water no longer calm, the motion more unpredictable. But Marcus didn't slow down. He adjusted instinctively, shifting his weight, reading the movement, guiding the boat through it like he had done 100 times before. Closer now. The shape became clearer. The silver crest. But it didn't look like the same boat that had left the marina. The angle was wrong. The hull leaned slightly to one side, lower than it should have been. The lights were out. Smoke drifted heavier now, darker against the sky. And there, movement. Figures along the rail. Waiting. Marcus cut the engine just enough to bring the boat in closer without slamming into the side. He used his hands against the hull, steadying the position, keeping the two vessels aligned. "Over here!" he called out. One of the investors turned first, his face pale, eyes wide with something close to panic. "Thank God," the man said, his voice breaking slightly. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. "Move slow," he instructed, "one at a time." The first man struggled with the railing, his hands shaking as he tried to swing his leg over. Marcus stepped forward, grabbing his arm firmly, guiding him across without letting him fall. "Sit down," Marcus said. "Steady. Stay low." The second man came faster, almost too fast. His movements rushed and uneven. Marcus caught him too, pulling him safely onto the smaller boat. "Easy," Marcus said. "You're good." Behind them, Captain Grant appeared, his shoulder braced awkwardly against his side. "You got more?" Marcus asked. Grant nodded, breathing hard. "One more," he said, "below deck." Marcus looked past him. The companionway, the door. Closed. "How long?" Marcus asked. "Too long," Grant replied. That was enough. Marcus turned back to the men he had already pulled across. "Stay here," he said. "Don't move." Then he stepped onto the silver crest. The deck shifted under his weight. He felt it immediately. Not just the motion of the water, the drag, the heaviness, the way the boat responded slower than it should have. Taking on water. A lot of it. Marcus moved fast. Down the stairs. Toward the door. The one that wouldn't open. He could already see the water pushing out from underneath it. Rising. Cold. Relentless. He knocked once, hard. "Victoria," he called. "It's Marcus." For a second, nothing. Then, a voice from the other side. Faint, strained. "I'm here," Marcus exhaled. "Still alive." "Step back from the door," he said. "Stay to the side." He turned, scanning quickly. Emergency equipment. There. Mounted along the wall. He grabbed the small rescue axe, feeling the weight of it settle into his hand. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just action. Because this wasn't about proving anything anymore. This wasn't about being right. It was about getting her out. Before the water took everything else with it. Marcus stepped back, raised the axe, and drove it into the lower panel of the door. The wood cracked. Not clean, but enough. He hit it again. And again. Each strike controlled, deliberate, breaking through without sending splinters inward. The opening widened. Water surged through faster now, spilling out across the floor. Marcus dropped to one knee, reaching through the gap, feeling for the latch. Bent. Misaligned. Just like he expected. "Hold on," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He adjusted his grip, working the mechanism by feel, forcing it back into position. The pressure fought him. But Marcus didn't stop. Because out there, in the dark, rising water on the other side, someone was waiting. And this time, he wasn't going to be too late. The latch gave with a dull, stubborn click. Marcus felt it more than he heard it. The tension in the mechanism shifted just enough under his hands, and the door pushed inward as the pressure behind it released. A surge of cold water spilled out past his knees, rushing into the stairwell in a heavy, unstoppable wave. Marcus braced himself against the frame. "Victoria!" he called again. For a split second, there was only the sound of water moving. Then, she emerged from the darkness. Not the composed CEO from the marina, not the woman in the white blazer who had stood so still while tearing his report in half. This version of Victoria Hale looked smaller. Soaked. Shaking. Her hair clung to her face, her movements slower, heavier as she fought against the water dragging at her legs. Marcus stepped forward without hesitation, reaching for her arm. "I've got you," he said. She didn't argue, didn't question. She just grabbed onto him like he was the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly lost all structure. "Move," Marcus said, guiding her toward the stairs. "Stay with me." The boat lurched again. Harder this time. The angle shifted beneath them, throwing their balance off just enough to make every step feel uncertain. Victoria slipped. Marcus tightened his grip, pulling her back upright. "Keep going," he said. She nodded, her breath uneven, her focus narrowed down to one thing: getting out. They reached the base of the stairs just as another deep tremor ran through the vessel. Somewhere below, something metal gave way with a hollow, echoing sound that carried through the structure like a warning. Marcus didn't look back. He pushed her upward. "Go," he said. Victoria climbed, her hands gripping the rail, her body moving on instinct more than strength. Halfway up, the second blast came. It wasn't as loud as the first, but it was closer. A sharp, violent jolt that shook the stairwell and sent a shock through the deck beneath their feet. A section of paneling tore loose somewhere behind them, slamming into the narrow space with enough force to send a burst of debris through the air. Marcus felt it hit him. Hard. Not a clean strike. Not something that knocked him down. But enough. A sharp impact against his shoulder that sent a wave of pain down his arm, hot and immediate. He sucked in a breath, but didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. "Keep moving," he said, his voice tighter now. Victoria didn't hesitate. She reached the top of the stairs and pulled herself onto the deck, gasping for air as the open sky hit her all at once. Marcus followed a second later, using the railing to steady himself as he stepped up behind her. The deck tilted again. More pronounced now. The silver crest was leaning. Slowly, but steadily, toward the water. Marcus grabbed Victoria's arm again. "This way," he said. Across the deck. toward the smaller boat still holding position alongside. The wind hit harder up here, carrying the thick smell of fuel and smoke. The sky had darkened slightly, the light flattening as the sun dipped lower. Everything felt heavier, slower, like time itself had started to drag. They reached the rail. Otis's boat rocked just below. The two investors crouched low where Marcus had told them to stay. Captain Grant sat near the center, his injured shoulder braced, his eyes tracking every movement. "You're up," Marcus said to Victoria. She hesitated, just for a second. Not because she didn't understand, but because this was the moment everything changed. She looked at him, really looked, at the man she had dismissed, the man she had silenced, the man standing here now, injured, steady, holding her life in his hands without hesitation. There was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not control, not authority. Something else. Recognition. Then Marcus nodded once. "Go," he said. That broke it. Victoria swung her leg over the rail, her movements unsteady but determined. Marcus kept one hand on her arm, guiding her down as she stepped onto the smaller boat. Otis reached up, helping her the rest of the way. "You're good," he said. Marcus followed last. The moment his weight shifted onto the smaller boat, Otis pushed off hard, creating distance between them and the silver crest. They didn't get far before it happened. The yacht gave one long, slow tilt, then another, the angle increasing just enough to make it clear. There was no saving it. Not anymore. They watched from a short distance as the vessel settled lower into the water, smoke still rising in uneven pulses. No dramatic collapse, no sudden disappearance, just a slow, inevitable surrender. Victoria stood near the edge of the boat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes fixed on what had just been her deal, her certainty, her control. All of it slipping away beneath the surface. Marcus sat down heavily on the bench, his injured shoulder throbbing now that the adrenaline had started to fade. He didn't look at her. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to say. The truth had already spoken. It had just taken everything falling apart for anyone to hear it. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens began to carry over the water. The Coast Guard, finally. Victoria let out a breath that trembled as it left her. "You came back," she said quietly. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out over the water toward where the silver crest had been. Then he spoke. "I didn't do it for you," he said. His voice wasn't harsh, just clear. "I did it because it was the right thing." Victoria nodded slowly. There was no defense left, no argument, just the weight of what she had done, and the undeniable truth of what he had chosen to do anyway. The boat rocked gently beneath them as the first rescue vessel approached, lights flashing, voices calling out, order returning to chaos. But for Victoria Hale, nothing would ever look the same again. The Coast Guard vessel cut through the water with authority, its engines louder, steadier, built for moments like this. Blue lights flickered against the darkening sky, casting brief flashes across the faces of everyone on Otis's small boat. Orders were called out. Lines were thrown. Hands reached. Everything became structured again. Controlled. Marcus stood slowly as they pulled alongside, his shoulder stiff, the dull ache now spreading deeper into his arm. A medic stepped forward immediately, scanning him with trained eyes. "Let me take a look at that," she said, already reaching for her kit. Marcus shook his head once. "Check him first," he said, nodding toward Captain Grant. The medic followed his gaze, hesitated for half a second, then moved past Marcus toward the captain. Marcus stepped back, letting the professionals take over. That was the way it worked. You did what you could. Then you got out of the way. Victoria stood near the edge of the boat, wrapped in a thermal blanket someone had placed over her shoulders. Her hands gripped the fabric tightly, knuckles pale against the rough material. She wasn't shaking from the cold anymore. Not entirely. Her eyes stayed fixed on Marcus, watching him, trying to understand something she hadn't understood before. Across from them, one of the Coast Guard officers spoke into a radio, relaying details back to shore. Engine failure confirmed. Vessel taking on water. All passengers accounted for. No fatalities. No fatalities. The words hung in the air like something fragile, something that could have easily gone the other way. Marcus lowered himself onto the edge of the bench again, finally letting his body rest. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind exhaustion in its place. He rolled his shoulder slightly, testing it. Pain shot through it, sharp but manageable. He exhaled. "Looks worse than it is," he muttered. "You always say that." Marcus looked up. Victoria stood a few feet away now, the blanket still wrapped around her, her expression quieter than it had ever been. There was no edge to her voice, no distance, just honesty. Marcus didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, then back out at the water. The place where the silver crest had been. Gone now. Swallowed. "What happened out there?" Victoria began, then stopped. The words didn't come easy. Not for her. Not like they used to. She tried again. "You told me," she said. "You told me exactly what would happen." Marcus nodded once. "I did." She swallowed. "And I didn't listen." It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't soften it. "No," he said. "You didn't." The truth landed between them. Clear, unavoidable. Victoria took a slow breath. "I thought—" she started, then shook her head slightly. "No, that's not true." She adjusted her grip on the blanket. "I didn't think," she said. "I decided." Marcus glanced at her. That was closer. She looked back at him, her eyes steady now. "I decided your voice didn't matter," she continued. "That your report didn't matter. That you didn't matter." The words were quiet, but they carried weight, real weight. Marcus didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence. Because this wasn't for him. This was something she had to say. Victoria looked down for a moment, then back up. "And I was wrong," she said. Simple, direct. No defense, no explanation, just truth. The Coast Guard boat shifted slightly as they began moving back toward shore, the lights of the city growing brighter in the distance. Marcus leaned back slightly, letting the motion carry him. "You were," he said. No anger, no satisfaction, just agreement. Victoria nodded once, accepting it. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The water moved beneath them, steady and dark now, as evening settled fully over the bay. Then Victoria said something that surprised even her. "Why did you come back?" Marcus turned his head slightly. "You had every reason not to," she added. That part was true. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone on that boat knew it. Marcus thought about the question. Not long. He had already answered it once, but this time he gave her a little more. "Because it doesn't stop being wrong just because someone else made the mistake," he said. Victoria watched him closely. "And letting it happen," Marcus continued, doesn't make it right. She absorbed that. Let it settle. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't trying to move past something. She was letting it stay. The Coast Guard vessel picked up speed, cutting back toward the marina, the city lights reflecting across the water in long, broken lines. Behind them, there was nothing left of the Silver Crest to see, just open water. Quiet again, like it had never been there at all. But the consequences of what had happened, those were just beginning. Back at Bayfront Marina, things were already shifting. Officers moved through the operations office with purpose, asking questions, pulling records, following timelines that didn't line up the way they were supposed to. Mara Collins stood near the edge of the room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as she watched it unfold. She had already handed over everything. The original reports, the altered versions, the recorded call with Victor. Time-stamped. Clear. Impossible to ignore. Victor Lang stood across the room, his usual composure cracking just enough to show what was underneath. Not control. Not confidence. Something closer to panic. The narrative he had tried to build, the one where Marcus was the problem, it wasn't holding. Not anymore. One of the officers stepped toward him. "Mr. Lang," he said. Victor straightened slightly. "Yes, we're going to need you to come with us." Victor opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the room like he might find something there to change what was happening. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Because the truth, the real truth, had finally surfaced. And this time, there was nowhere left to bury it. The marina didn't look the same the next morning. The same docks stretched out over the water. The same boats rocked gently against their lines. The same sunlight reflected off polished surfaces like nothing had changed. But something had. People spoke quieter, moved slower, looked at each other differently. Because everyone knew what had happened. And more importantly, everyone knew what almost happened. Marcus Reed stood at the edge of Dock 7 again. Same place, same view. But this time, no clipboard in his hand. No uniform. Just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, his left shoulder still stiff beneath the fabric. He wasn't supposed to be here. At least, not officially. But when the call came late the night before, when someone from legal said there would be a meeting, that his presence was requested, he hadn't said no. Because this wasn't about the job anymore. This was about something else. Footsteps approached behind him. Marcus didn't turn right away. He already knew who it was. Victoria Hale stopped a few feet away. No white blazer this time, no sharp lines or perfect presentation, just a simple navy jacket, her hair pulled back, her expression different. Not smaller, not weaker, but stripped of something. The edge. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. Marcus kept his eyes on the water. "You asked," he replied. Victoria nodded slightly. "I did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable but not easy either. Finally, Marcus turned. "What do you want?" he asked. Direct, same as always. Victoria met his gaze, not above it, not past it, at it. "There's going to be an investigation," she said. "Internal, external, everything." Marcus didn't react. "I figured," he said. "Victor's already in custody," she added. That got a small shift. Not surprise, just confirmation. "And the reports?" Marcus asked. Victoria didn't hesitate. We found all three, she said. The originals. She paused. They were exactly as you described. Marcus nodded once. I know. Another silence. But this one felt different. Heavier, more final. Victoria took a breath. I called this meeting, she said, because I need to say something in front of everyone. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't ask what. He just waited. Because that's what he had been doing from the beginning. Waiting for someone to listen. The dock began to fill slowly. Employees gathered in small groups, murmuring quietly. Some glanced at Marcus, others at Victoria, most avoiding eye contact entirely. Mara stood off to the side, her arms crossed loosely, her eyes moving between them. Otis leaned against a post near the back, watching everything without saying a word. When the group had settled enough, Victoria stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet did the work for her. A few days ago, she began, I made a decision on this dock. Her eyes moved briefly across the faces in front of her, then settled on Marcus. I dismissed a man who was trying to tell me the truth. The words landed. Simple, clear. No corporate language, no distancing, just ownership. I had the authority to do it, she continued, and I used that authority without listening. A few people shifted slightly. No one spoke. Victoria didn't look away. I chose speed over caution, she said, profit over safety, and control over truth. She let that sit. Because it needed to. And because of that, she added, her voice steady but lower now, people nearly lost their lives. The dock stayed silent. The kind of silence that meant people were actually hearing what was being said. Victoria took a breath. I was wrong. There it was. No hesitation, no qualifiers, just the truth. Her gaze returned to Marcus. You warned me, she said. You did your job, and I ignored you. Marcus stood still. No reaction, no satisfaction, just listening. Victoria stepped closer. Not too close, but enough. You came back, she said, after everything. Her voice shifted slightly. Not weaker, but more human. I don't have a way to measure what that means, she continued, or what it cost you, but I'm standing here because you made a choice I didn't deserve. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke. I didn't do it for you, he said. Same words, same truth. Victoria nodded. I know, she said. That's what makes it matter. Another pause. Then she straightened slightly. There's going to be changes, she said, turning back toward the group. Effective immediately. Her voice carried again. Controlled, but not distant. No vessel leaves this marina without independent verification. No report gets altered once it's filed. And no one, myself included, has the authority to override a safety concern without full review. People listened. Really listened. Because now, they knew what happened when they didn't. Victoria turned back to Marcus. I want you to come back, she said. No build-up. No negotiation. Director of Marine Safety, she added. Full authority, independent oversight, no interference. The words hung there. Heavy, significant. The kind of offer most people wouldn't hesitate to take. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked past her, at the dock, at the water, at the place where everything had started. Then he spoke. I don't need a title, he said. Victoria didn't interrupt. I don't need authority written on paper, he continued. I just need to know that when I say something's wrong. He paused. Someone listens. The dock stayed quiet. Because everyone understood what he meant. Victoria held his gaze. You will be heard, she said. Not as a promise, as a commitment. Marcus studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Then I'll come back, he said. Not for the job, not for the title, but for the reason behind it. Weeks later, the marina felt different. Not perfect, but changed. Processes tightened, checks doubled, people asked questions they hadn't asked before. And when Marcus walked down the dock, people noticed, not because he demanded it, but because they understood now. Aaliyah walked beside him that morning, her small hand in his, her eyes wide as she looked out over the boats. That's where it happened? She asked. Marcus nodded. Yeah. She looked out at the water, thinking, then back at him. You saved them, she said. Marcus shook his head slightly. I did what I was supposed to do, he replied. Aaliyah smiled. That's the same thing. Marcus didn't argue. At the far end of the dock, Victoria stood waiting. Not as a boss, not as someone above him. Just there. She crouched slightly as Aaliyah approached, smiling in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. I like your shoes, Victoria said. Aaliyah grinned. Thanks. They talked for a moment, easy and natural. Then Aaliyah ran ahead, drawn toward the boats and the water. Marcus stood beside Victoria. Neither of them spoke right away. They didn't need to, because some things didn't need words anymore. Finally, Victoria said quietly, You changed everything. Marcus looked out over the water. No, he said. Then he turned slightly. I just didn't stay quiet. The wind moved across the marina, carrying the sound of ropes against wood, of distant engines starting, of a place learning how to listen again. And this time, when the truth was spoken, it didn't get buried. It was heard. Marcus Reed stood on that same dock where he was once dismissed, and this time, the truth he carried was the very thing everyone had to face. Sometimes, the real cost of power isn't failure. It's ignoring the one voice that could have prevented it. And sometimes, the greatest strength isn't being right. It's choosing to do what's right, even when no one stood with you. The next time someone speaks up about something that doesn't feel right, don't brush it off too quickly. Just pause. Listen. Because that moment could matter more than you realize, just like it did for Marcus. If this story stayed with you, comment one below and tell me, have you ever been ignored when you were telling the truth? There's another story coming up next, and this one might hit even closer to home.